going to go ahead and record this to the computer. So welcome to today's class. It is Thursday, April 23rd. We're getting very close to the end of the semester. We've got about another week of sort of learning, and then we're going to be sort of moving into sharing drafts. So let's take a quick look today at the agenda, and we'll look at what we're going to do. So 23rd, we have synchronous work. I'm actually going to, I've changed this a little bit. My first class really wanted a more interactive lecture, Imagine. So we did that, and I think that worked really well. So we're meeting online. Then I'm going to be using the video lecture and kind of talking you through it. And then we'll take a few minutes, and you're going to break out and ideally, we were going to review the techniques from chapter 3. I'd like to maybe move that into synchronous time today or asynchronous time today. And instead, when you look at your literature reviews in your study groups, you're really just going to be looking for sort of the initial pieces that I'll be talking about in the lecture for today. We have a handout on writing literature reviews that is on the Moodle, and I'll move that up to under our today's work so that you can access that easily. Then you have some curious researcher review, and over the next 4 days, drafting your literature review. So I know that that is a daunting process, but it is one that you will want to do over time. And I have sort of 2 videos to help you do that. The first one is how to take an annotated bibliography and turn it into a literature review. And I give you several examples from my own work, and that's my lecture. Hopefully you've taken a look at that one, and if not, you can look at it today. And the second one is a lecture that I found that's fantastic. It's definitely geared toward beginners, which we are in this class, and that video lecture, I'll take us through it today, but you can also look at it offline and just kind of review it, and I will talk you through it today, and I'll have you potentially screenshot or take notes. One thing that I haven't been great about reminding us about is, like, you should be taking notes. Like, this is just like you do in a class. You should be taking notes, not just like laying on a bed passively experiencing this information. We should be taking notes as we're doing this. I know that that is difficult, especially if you're used to taking notes on your computer or there's not enough space. All those things are just challenges, but if we can take notes, we can do that. And one of the things we can do is do screenshots on our computer of the pieces of the lecture for today that I think will be most helpful to you. So I'm gonna stop share, and we'll come back together. Clear as water, clear as mud. Okay, I'm getting some.
Clear as mud.
Clear as mud.
Is this a saying?
Yeah, like, is it clear like water, or is it clear like mud, which is not clear?
It's clear like water.
Yay. Okay.
Yeah, I got a little confused on that.
I used to say it all the time in class, but like, it's a little more, you know. Anyway, if I say it every day, then we'll get used to it. I started saying it this morning because the people were not doing thumbs up, and then we went to a screen where they couldn't show me thumbs up because we were looking at something together with screen share. So I was like, okay, clear as water, clear as mud. So if I say clear as water, clear as mud, you say water. Or sometimes my students were saying things like lemonade or LaCroix or LaCroix, if you want to be correct. Okay, so we're talking through literature reviews. What I really want you to be thinking about is your own work. So just kind of orient your mind right now to, like, what is the work that I'm working on? What am I trying to prove? What am I trying to illustrate today? I'm going to share the screen, and we're going to go to the video. Again, this is not my video. It's a video from this wild, I think he's Australian guy. Not super, super entertaining, but I feel like we can learn a lot from this. So
in this video on writing the literature review, we're going to look at what a literature review is. We'll look at some of the language you can use to write your literature review, and we'll look at some example text. In the video.
Okay, so of that, what we're going to look at is we're going to do a definition of what a literature review is, and we're going to talk about the different elements that we need to have in our literature review. And I will show you kind of like, yes, this includes some examples, but we're not going to look at the examples from this particular one. So at a certain point, I'll have to make this a little bit smaller, but right now I'll make it larger, and I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to the first things. We're going to look at what is a literature review, the purpose, and what does it consist of. And I'm going to skip ahead to this definition, which I think is a really good one. Okay, and I'm going to make us small for just a minute so I can read it. A literature review is a part of the paper where there's extensive reference to related research in your field. It's where connections are made between the source text that you draw on and where you position yourself in your own work amongst these sources. And this is a source, Ridley 2012, page 2. You can see this is in APA. Okay, so in a minute we'll move forward in the video, but this is a great time, like right now, to do a screenshot of this so that you just know what this is. And we're going to go through, I'm going to skip ahead to here. Oops, too far here. And we're going to look at this. So there are 3 pieces of this. And you really want to think of the literature review as having 3 pieces to it. It has the first piece, which is like, we should understand by reading your literature review that you know enough about your topic. So it should have extensive references to related research. How many references does that mean? Right? So to give us an idea of a graduate level, like a doctoral level, or like my level, which is, you know, like a professional academic level, I'm using between 25 to 30 and 50 sources per paper. And my papers are between 28 and 35 pages in length. So that's not exactly what we're going by, but if we think about how many of those sources I use in my literature review, I would say it's between 15 and 20, or maybe 2/3 of the number of sources I use in a given paper. So sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less. It just depends on the type of paper, and it will be the same for you too. Really briefly, I'm going to pause to let Jonah come in. Jonah, come on into class.
Into those works
Oops.
that you read.
Sorry. No, it's ruining. Zoom is so annoying. Okay, so here we go. So if we think about this again, what does extensive reference to related research mean, right? This really means for us in our papers, probably five sources around that we're going to cite in our literature review. We don't really want to do fewer than that, and we may want to do as many as 6 or even 7. What's the purpose of this? Again, to illustrate that you know enough about the topic to like add to it, and that you can also, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we move on, but that you can also analyze the work that's happening. You also want to show connections. So I'll talk about how that'll happen in a minute, but what you want to do is show connections between one researcher's work and another researcher's work, so 2 people's work, and then also your work. So 2 researchers that came before you, and then you want to show your own work alongside them. And that's, you know, when you position yourself in your own work within the actual literature review.
You position yourself in relation to those works that you read. So
what he said.
The literature review starts with the reading. And the person who needs to evaluate the sources is you.
So we have pretty much already done this. So I'm gonna move ahead a little so we don't have to look at this man's face. Sorry, very, very kind person. So we have already done this. In an ideal world, we have spent a ton of time in class with Gina online in our last sessions. We spent like 3 classes making Google Docs, talking about finding and evaluating sources. We should know how to do this by now, right? So in our annotated bibs, we should have all this information that's here, okay? So I'm gonna minimize it really quickly. This is a great time to do a screenshot, right? Evaluate your sources, and this information should be in your annotated bib for author research. Like, are they an expert? Are they an academic? What's their standing in their field? Have they done a milestone, or what I've been calling a foundational study? How are they recommended? Then what is the source? Is it peer-reviewed and academic? That means it's a scholarly source from journal articles, and this talks about why journal articles are preferred, but we've talked about that a lot already, so we can skip that part, right? So are they peer reviewed? Are they academic? Are they an expert or trusted or a published document of some sort? So ideally, even if you're using something from like the Atlantic Monthly or the New Yorker or New York Times or something like that, it's still a fairly reliable source. It's not something that you just found on Reddit, okay? Unless your study is on Reddit. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We do already know essentially these things. These are questions you can ask about the research and biases and so forth. And now this is where I'm going to go back a tiny bit and I'm going to let him talk for just a second. We're transitioning from thinking about like, what is the literature review trying to do and how we need to evaluate sources in order to be able to write it, and say, we've probably already done that, right? Hopefully all of us, our annotated bibs are technically due Friday. Hopefully all of us have at least 7 to 9 annotated bibs completed. Those include things like the credibility of the author, and they should have at least 3 or more academic articles within your annotated bibs. And just a reminder, those annotated bibs are not due until the end of the semester, and they're due as part of your researcher's notebook. However, I will be reminding you of this tomorrow on Friday when I send you your weekly email. And in that, I will tell you, like, you should be done with your annotated bibs in the next 24 hours or so that you can write your literature review. So here, how do we organize our literature review? Let's find out.
It depends on your questions. You might organize them chronologically by time. You might organize them by the perspectives of different authors, the positions taken, the schools of thought, the method, how they did the research. Or, most commonly, you might organize it topically or thematically. Like,
I'm going to stop there and use an example that we know rather than one that he's using here. So I shared with you a video last week that I would encourage you to review, especially for the section on literature review. So I shared with you one of my former students' essays, and I walked you through, sort of like what were the moves she made, what were the transitions that were made in that piece, how did she organize the literature review, and then how did she organize the discussion of the results. So look again at that. If you see what she's done, there's sort of 2 ways you could classify it. One is by topic or theme, as is suggested here. It's not chronological. I'll talk about that option in just a minute. But what's kind of important to think about, and one of my students in my 945 class mentioned this, is the idea of sort of general to specific. And that is somewhere between general to specific and topic or thematic orientation is how that student did her paper. To remind us, it was on food additives. So what is a food additive, and what are these things, how are they classified? Then moving to more narrow stuff like what are the problems with health and food additives, and then even more narrow, what are some recommendations that doctors make about our use of these food additives or ingestion of them. So topic is really how it was organized, but it also could be thought of as general to specific. So right now, I'd like everyone to just take a second and jot down what seems to work for you. And if you're wondering about chronological, that really works well with things like related to law and evolution of ideas, such as one of my students is doing work on use of technology in sports, in watching sports, and in refereeing sports. There's definitely a chronological timeline that has to do with that. Like, when was technology introduced in sports? What was the impact that it had initially? What did people say about it then? What are people saying about it now? That might be much more chronologically oriented as far as a literature review. So take 1 second right now and write that down for yourself. Okay, so thumbs up if we feel like good about this idea, either chronological, topical. Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. So let's move ahead a little bit. This is so important.
And the aims of your study. Ultimately, you have to synthesize the ideas and respond to the text.
Okay, so at the bottom, he says what I have said all along, and I love that this guy is just basically echoing all the thoughts that I've been sharing with you for weeks. Ultimately, organization depends on your research question and the aim of your study, right? So you need to think about what is the argument that you're planning on making. At this point, you may not be 100% sure. And this is where organizing your research here may be really difficult. We're not necessarily capable at this exact moment of knowing what we're going to be adding to the conversation for many reasons. Maybe our study isn't complete yet. Maybe we haven't gotten all of our results. Maybe we haven't had time to code our data. Once we do those things, however, we should have a pretty good idea of like, okay, this is what the research says. And then we can begin to position it within the other conversations that have been had before about that same topic, and then talk about the relationship. You want to keep in mind that your research question is going to move from question to suggested answer, and that is the argument of your paper, right? So your findings, one more time, are the argument of your paper. Rather than starting, as you might have in high school, with an argument and then just defending it, you're illustrating how your research in the world with a question came to a finding that illustrated an argument. So because of that, you may have to screenshot this right now, good opportunity, and come back to it, maybe at the end of the weekend, maybe sometime next week when you're organizing. But until then, let your research question guide you.
So, a tip, create a plan, a sectioned plan as a document, and as you read, take notes and import them directly into the plan so that you have a sense of organization and section.
So I'm going to pause him and say, that's awesome. And if you did that or do that in the future, that's great. What I suggest now is grouping your annotated bibliographies by topic. So instead of like trying to do an exact organization and like reinvent the wheel, take your annotated bibs, copy and paste them from your researcher's notebook into a separate document, and then group them by topic. Which ones support which area, or there may be some that support more than one topic. Copy and paste the whole annotated bib and put it under a different topic. And that way you start to see like, okay, I need to talk about this, I need to talk about this, I need to talk about this. And I see I have 3 different themes, or I have 3 different topics, or I have 3 different chronological eras. And then you can start to understand. Does that make sense to everybody? It's just one thing you can try to see whether this works or not, okay? So I'm gonna move ahead a little bit here. 2 key elements, let me move back. Here we go. So how do you actually write your literature review? We're gonna look at that.
Elements. One is a descriptive or reporting element where you talk about what happened. You describe what the author has found, what they discussed, what they did. It's an account. The second crucial aspect of the literature review is an interpretive or critical element, the dialogue, where you ask and answer questions of the text. You analyze, you interpret, you synthesize, you bring together information.
Okay, I'm going to pause it here. So this is pretty much as far as we'll go with this lecture. What happens after this is he gives a lot of examples and kind of highlights the areas that are the descriptive reportorial areas, and then highlights the interpretative or critical areas. We're going to do that for ourselves with our own studies. So in a few minutes, once I kind of go through this and talk a little bit more about what this looks like, you will be put in your study groups and using ideally one of your own articles that's a scholarly article and a lit review. One of the people in the group will screen share the way that I've been doing, and then you'll look at that to say like, where are the descriptive reportorial elements, and then where are the interpretative or critical elements. We'll talk about that now, and then you'll go do that on your own. If you do not have access to a scholarly article, I've put up I think 5 different articles, any of which you can use, okay? So let's talk a little bit about each of these.
The second part is super important because if we just stay at the first part, the descriptive reporting element, we run the risk of having our writing grounded in a shopping list style of writing where we're saying, he noted, he found, she did this, she discovered. It becomes a list of ideas rather than an interpretation or a treatment of ideas.
I'm going to pause it there and just repeat that. This is so, so important. The papers I get that are essentially just phoning it in are ones that just take the annotated bib and just like he says, a shopping list. They just pop, 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 pop. This happened, there was a study, there was a study. You must, in order to attempt to fulfill the grading contract, you must add the interpretative or critical element, okay? So we're gonna look specifically at like, how does that actually happen, right? So there's some examples here, and then I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. You'll see more examples here. In the black with the gray highlighting, that is the descriptive, or what you might consider your 2-sentence or 1-sentence or 2-sentence summary, right? From your annotated bib, that's the summary. It's like what happened, who did it, when. The second part is one that you might not have actually written yet, and that's the part you need to add. So you hopefully have your annotated bib. That's the interpretative part that has to be added to it. So in the blue, we're going to move ahead, and here, this is a great one to screenshot. This is some language that highlights the importance of interpreting and can help you use these words, or if you use these words, it can really help you to understand, like, okay, what does it mean to show interpretation or to show analysis? This study shows that, or it reveals that, or it highlights, or it's important, or it's significant because. You're going to be illustrating things like, did one researcher base their research on someone else's research? So you're showing a connection between those two. Are those two people the most foundational studies that have been happening in your field? This calls attention to a problem, or this calls attention to a consistent issue. All of these, this is vital, this is crucial, this shows, this illustrates, all of these kinds of languages help you to build the case that you have a question that still needs to be answered. So all the conversations that you have about other people's research are really assisting you to illustrate that your research question is necessary and important, okay? So if we move a little bit forward, let me make us disappear so we can see. This language is important because, and this helps you to interpret it. It moves your writing from descriptive to interpretative, and it also can give you a stronger writer's voice, okay? Some more examples are here throughout, and it shows description and critique, okay? So let's look at this one. The first key area of this review concerns age and memory loss. This sounds a lot like something you'd find at the beginning of your annotated bibliography. It's a summary statement, right? This is what happened. So-and-so study, however, was limited in its application because that person chose to focus on a small sample size. All of you have heard me talk a lot about the study that I'm doing right now, the 4-university study. The biggest problem with it, the original study, and why I'm redoing this study with a much bigger population, the population was too small and it was at a technological college. That means that all of the people who did that study were engineers or technologically oriented. Well, what does that mean for the study? It's essentially biased, right? And yet it's a foundational study that's used for so many other things. It had to be redone in order for the evidence that comes from it to be really useful to everybody. So you really want to take this opportunity to be as critical as you can of the other studies while still maintaining a fairly positive tone. So I'm going to stop the screen share here, and we're going to head into our study groups. Do we feel ready to do that, or do we want another example? Thumbs up, we're okay. Silence, I guess we want one more example, or you can say more example. Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. I'm going to stop the share. All right, so at this point, we're going to move into our study groups, and I'm going to just pause our recording right now. Pause button. So I'm in a breakout room, and I'm just going to add to the lecture for today. There was a good question about sort of like, how many sources do we have to have in our annotated bibs? So important to remember that, like, I'm asking for 9 for your researcher's notebook. That is technically due on Friday, which is going to be the 24th of April, but I'm not collecting it, right? You're responsible for kind of keeping on top of that, and you all are going on your own scale. One of the things to think about is that you may, in the next week, have 8 or 9 of these annotated bibs, and they're done. And then you find that like 2 or 3 of them you're not actually going to use in your paper. And then you're going to find maybe 2 or 3 other articles. Well, you do not have to redo the annotated bibs unless it's something that's helpful to you. So don't feel like you have to redo the annotated bib or like fix it in any way. Just go ahead and, do the paper. Remember how to incorporate the, descriptive and then the analytical together and connect them to your work and to other people's work. Do that in the lit review, but don't worry about having to update or redo the annotated bib. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. Hi, friends. We're closing the breakout rooms and we're coming back together. If you can, put on your videos. I love the videos. How many of us are doing like FaceTime or doing Zoom with friends just to like stay in contact? Good. Hopefully you can do that more. I'm finding it really helpful to do. I have a one day a week that I meet with my writing group, and it's helpful.
Wait, did you get my message?
Did you send a message?
I said we need uno momento, por favor.
Okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't get it. That's okay. You
Oh,
don't.
I'm back here. Oh, I'm back here. Oh, hi. Sorry. I was screen sharing.
So much is happening.
Hello, Dr. Field. Sorry.
So it's okay if you're not done with the forum post now. That's like technically an asynchronous activity. So you're getting started now, and then hopefully you can like text each other or do your WhatsApp connection and just make sure that you post something sometime in the next like hour and a half to 2 hours. So I wanted to check in though and say like, how clear are we on what we're supposed to be doing with that lit review? Can anybody?
Clear as water.
Clear as water. Great. So ideally, we understand that there should be these sort of 3 major components. That's, explaining all of the information that we have, giving some kind of an overview to our readers to illustrate both that we know what we're talking about, as well as that we're able to position our work within the discourse community. And then we're also showing some connections between those things that we've read, and then we're also showing our own positionality. So how does our work connect to them? So there's sort of those 3 stacked pieces. And then how does it get written? In sort of 2 pathways. One pathway is through this descriptive summary language, and then the second pathway is through that analysis or criticism of the work. All of that is leading to the conclusion that your question, your research question, is necessary, and then that's when you transition into your methodology and like, so this question is necessary, here's what I asked, and here's what I found. Does that make sense to folks? And we will revisit this again. Yeah, and I do encourage you, watch the video again if you want to just kind of take it in one more time. You can sort of skip the parts that we already know a lot about, like doing evaluation of our sources. We know that stuff. Yeah. Are there questions before we review what's due in the next week? Questions? You can always individually message me. So let's look really briefly. I'm going to share the screen and we'll look our video lecture, review that. There's also a handout on the Moodle, Curious Researcher, pages 113 to 128. Spend a little time with that. At this point in the class, it's going to be very, very helpful for you to have that tool with you because we're not kind of spending those hours in class that we would throwing ideas on the board and talking it out and giving, drafting things and writing things during class because we're not doing that. Spend a little time with the Curious Researcher. Give yourself that extra time to understand what we're trying to do. and then draft your literature review. So ideally, you've got four days right now before we see each other again on Tuesday. On Tuesday, we'll be moving into talking about the methods section. So you want, in an ideal world, to have some kind of draft. It doesn't have to be perfect, but some drafty draft of your literature review so that you can move into a drafty draft of your methods. Now, most of us already have most of our methods done, or at least a strong draft, and have already uploaded that to the methods forum. So you're just going to be taking that and fine-tuning it. So that's why the assignment is sort of between Tuesday and Thursday. And again, none of this is actually due. It's all just, you know, making progress on our extended research essay. Yeah? Are there any questions before we conclude? Okay, so let's stop the video for today.